So I am welcoming a whole host of people who I think are going to share the screen with me in just a second. And we have chosen to have a very large panel. So as they're getting filtered in, I will just make a quick couple of remarks about our amazing panel of folks. I'm so excited about them. So first, I want to say to them and to all of you that I'm super excited, but I'm also super sorry because I am sticking a lot of people on the same 55-minute panel. And usually these people are long-winded like I am. And so we like to talk. We're excited about our work and we get really jazzed about talking about what we're doing. I have prepped them in advance that there are too many of us to be doing that today. So they're going to keep their remarks brief. The reason that we did this, though, is because there's just so many great scholars in the universe who are doing this work. And if I created a panel of 2 or 3, I would have left out more. And in fact, I could have had 30 on this panel, right? I already feel like I left out a bunch of really amazing people. So I wanted to welcome them all to the space. Thank you very much for joining me. The only one who isn't joining us today is Dr. Jill Viglione. She has a family issue today, so she's sorry that she can't be with us. And I was like, it's fine because we're overrun anyway. Get out of here. Anyway, I wanted to say thank you all very much for coming. So let me just kind of set it up for you. We envisioned this to be kind of a conversation between me and the panelists among all of ourselves, talking about how the work that we're doing, the work that we're not doing, and the work that we wish we had more time to do sort of is answering or beginning to answer or starting to highlight issues related to social justice. So I sent the panelists an email a week or so ago telling them that I was going to keep it simple and ask them 3 basic questions after I asked them to do brief introductions. And the panelists can chime in and answer any or all of them. I won't call you out, I promise. You can pick the ones you like, or you can answer them all. It doesn't matter. We don't even have to get through all 3 questions. I know that what we're going to talk about today here is going to be inspirational. In addition to that, I wanted to say to all of the folks in the listening room who are listening to us, what I was thinking about the panel is that we're not going to be able to do a deep dive into many of the issues that we all find super important. But I think what it's going to do for more junior scholars or postdocs or even more senior scholars like myself, I get inspired by listening to these folks, is actually do what we do every day, which is every answer that we find brings up 25 more questions. And so I'm hoping that some people in the room get inspired to start their own line of research based on the things that we're talking about, or continue a line of research that they're on and feel like they're connected to this community of people who are doing similar work. So what I'm going to ask you to do, this one time I'll call on you because I'll make us go around in a circle. I will ask you to give sort of a quick, maybe 30 seconds to a minute, just introduction of yourself. So anyone on the call who doesn't know you at least hears your name. And then I will begin to ask you brilliant questions that I've formulated and you can give me your brilliant answers. So Janani, you are first on my screen. Would you give a brief introduction?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Danielle. I'm Janani. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Criminology, Law and Society at George Mason University. So it's my first year here. It's been great so far. My research, thank you. My research is at the intersection of gender, punishment, and the life course. And I also use primarily, actually exclusively qualitative research methods. So that's my short and sweet.
Thank you. Very good job. Ebony, you're up next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ebony Ruhland, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati in the School of Criminal Justice. And my research focuses on how our criminal justice policies and practices impact individuals, families, and communities. So I focus primarily on probation and parole, as well as police and community relationships. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Michelle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Phelps. I'm an associate professor of sociology at the University of Minnesota. Much of my work has been on the expansion of the criminal legal system, particularly probation and imprisonment. And I'm working on a book right now on policing and police reform and police activism in Minneapolis.
That's awesome, by the way. I've been following your Twitter feed. Very exciting. Congratulations on the upcoming book. Pam.
Hi, I'm Pam Lattimore, and I am at RTI International. I was sitting here trying to think actually, Danielle, when you said you were a senior scholar, it was like, wait a minute, no, you're not, you're a baby. I was thinking about how long I've been doing this work. But I've been, most of my career has been focused on doing multi-site correctional evaluations, either prisoner reentry or probation. More recently, I've been doing pretrial work and now doing some work on expungement. So
Thank you.
Danielle, appreciate it.
Thank you. I still feel like a baby too. Someone called me a senior scholar the other day and I was like, you're obviously confused. Thank you. Ruben.
I'm Ruben Miller. I follow people in, through, and out of jails and prisons in the U.S. and I'm starting to do some work internationally too. And I'm glad to. Oh, I'm an associate professor of social work at the University of Chicago, and I'm a research professor at the American Bar Foundation. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Glad you could be with us. Beth.
Yeah, hi, I'm Beth Evner. I'm a professor of criminology and criminal justice at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Thanks for having me. I do a lot of things in corrections broadly. I've been working with jails pretty exclusively for the last 7 years. And then I'm doing a lot of work on small contexts with the criminal legal system in the form of warrants and fines and fees.
Awesome. Thank you. It's really good to see your face. Okay, so my first question is really broad and it gets to the heart of what all of these folks have been spending all of their days and probably sleepless nights working on and thinking about. And this is just a question about what have you been working on? What's going on in your world and how is what you're doing contributing to the theme of the symposium, which is the idea that corrections is somehow connected to, I think we all have lots of ideas how, but connected to the issues of social justice. You can jump right in if you feel like you want to go.
I'm not shy.
All right, go ahead.
So I found your question quite intriguing. As I said in introducing myself, most of my career has been looking at probation and prisoner reentry and in that area. And over the last several years, as I became involved in pretrial, and now I have a project focusing on expungement, I've really begun to have an appreciation, now that I've been doing this almost 40 years, an appreciation for the reach of the justice system into individuals' lives, the damage that can be done at pretrial, and then the fact that it's almost impossible to get out once you're caught. And I should be, maybe I am embarrassed, I don't know to say that, but you get focused on your own part of the problem. I really appreciate the fact that at this stage in my career, I've had my eyes opened to how people get into the system, and now really thinking about the tangled nightmare it is to try to leave behind a 20-year-old record. It's almost impossible. And I've said for many decades that I find the United States incredibly punitive compared to our peers, but in thinking, and I hope to be able to write some about this, and thinking about this thread that runs from the first encounter into the first jail booking through the plea bargain and then into the how do I ever get this off of my permanent record. It has really been something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and that clearly wraps itself a lot around all of these issues to do with social justice.
Definitely. Janani, I said I wasn't going to pick on you, but I'm going to pick on you for just 1 second because it seemed to connect nicely to your idea of life course.
Yeah. So I think it does. I feel like in my most recent work has moved a little bit away from the life course themes of my dissertation and the project immediately thereafter. But I think there is real power in seeing the processes as they unfold from beginning to end. And I'll just add to that I think that in this point in my career, I think I've been more inspired to engage with some of the more normative questions in our field. So kind of moving away from just the empirical analysis to trying to understand in my area, kind of the moral experience of imprisonment as well, and the ethical self-work that incarcerated people do. So that's kind of where I've been focusing my, social justice energies. So I just finished collecting and analyzing data, exploring like the significance of innocence in prison among exonerated men. And it's been really powerful, I think, kind of trying to push myself to think in those terms a little bit more engage with more interdisciplinary research has been helpful with that. And I've also been doing an ethnographic study on the support building strategies of families of incarcerated people, just to try and understand, and, so I've got one kind of very abstract project going on and one very tangible kind of policy focused one happening. And I think that there's merit in both. And I think I'm just kind of working at trying to bridge the two right now.
Yeah. Well, it also gets beyond Pam's, it sort of extends upon Pam's theme, right, of the harm that is caused to the individual who's involved, and then includes, as we all know, right, the lives of everyone else, right? They're not just, they don't live alone in their world, right? We all have to exist in that world too. And so I'm going to do it. I said I wasn't going to do it. I'm a total liar. Ruben, I'm going to do it to you too, because this deeply connects to your book.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it very much. Yeah, I'm very interested in that question specifically. What does it mean to, what's the reach? What's the reach of the carceral into, the life-giving institutions of a free society, into, how does it shape family dynamics? How does it shape the worlds of work? How does it shape the way, people who've been through jails or prisons, try to change the laws and policies that hem them in? In other words, how does it change the nature of their civic participation? What does this mean for questions of citizenship? Like these have been questions that I've been thinking about for quite some time, and I've had the privilege of following people for many, many years. And so some of that through research, some of that through life experience. I have a brother who's been incarcerated, I have a father who's incarcerated. I know 1,000 million people, like everybody on the call does, who've been, locked away. All of us have visited different people in different capacities over time. And so having formed relationships over time and watching, being able to watch how the consequence of incarceration escalates, watching it escalate, watching it show up in all kinds of ways in people's lives so far beyond jail or prison bars has been striking. And the way that I think the question of imprisonment relates to questions, or the questions of corrections relate to questions of justice, for me, it's been to document the damage that a single touch by the criminal justice system in any capacity, in any form, whether that be rehabilitative or, well-meaning, or whether it's a police encounter to stop someone from engaging in violence, it's to think about the damage that does over time. And also to see, really wonderful, well-meaning people do their best to do good. And the good perhaps that comes from a touch that's not at least intended to be punitive. So that's been my work and my role.
Yep. Okay, Michelle, I'm doing it to you next, because that made me think of sort of your idea of mass probation and sort of net widening and what an all-encompassing system looks like and what sort of harm it can do, back to Pam's point from earlier. Do you want to speak to that? I'm putting you on the spot. I'm so sorry. I said I wasn't gonna, and I'm so sorry.
I don't actually want to speak to that, but I want to speak to something else.
Yes,
so I'm
go
just
ahead.
gonna take the privilege of the mic.
Yes, do it.
I mean, I think, sort of the comments earlier around the expansiveness, I think articulated all of those issues really nicely, and the reverberating consequences. And, much of sociology in this area has been devoted to understanding those reverberating consequences, right? For the partners, for the parents, for the children, for the communities, right? We can think about kind of reverberating out. But the piece of the story I actually wanted to pick up on, and that I expected Ruben to talk about, so I'll talk about it for him for a minute, is this question that was brought up a minute ago around sort of like abstract projects versus concrete, and how we think about social justice in our work. And I would say one of the tensions that I really find in doing this work is how to think about balancing really concrete work with system actors or community actors, or trying to make change locally within the confines of academia, where many of us, but not all of us, are located, versus trying to change, as Ruben puts it in his book, right, hearts and minds, and trying to kind of change the conversation. And I feel like your orienting questions to us, Danielle, over email had been around sort of like, what are some of the challenges in doing this work? And I feel like a lot of folks lately, there's been sort of a sea shift as we recognize the value of doing this really hands-on, engaged, practical work where you're like working in a jurisdiction, right, to create a specific set of reforms or change that can do harm reduction, right, that can really like make people's lives better who are touched by the system. And there's a conflict sometimes with doing that and doing the kinds of changing the narrative, public facing work that many of us do, and then doing the sort of really academics talking to other academics work that our institutions are set to prize most valuably. And I think it's great that we've had that conversation about sort of broadening what's important, but I feel like sometimes it gets spun so far that people think about impactful work only in the grounds of sort of like, what are you changing today in a system, right? And what I have found really tough about doing that work as I get sort of more practical and more hands-on in some of my projects is like, it takes so much time, right? I mean, I have this project on the health of people who are on community supervision. We've been working with Hennepin County on that project, and we have spent years in meetings with people, and the county has seen some real changes. We take only a small amount of credit for pushing things in that direction, but we have put in just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours and $500,000 in grant funding. And you know, the department is changing how they handle who gets drug tests and when, and what happens when a drug test is positive. And that is profoundly meaningful work, right? But when I think about all of the person hours that went into doing that one very localized change, when there are just hundreds of thousands of these departments across the country, that makes me think, right, like writing books like Ruben Miller's award-winning
I know.
right? Like that really matters, right? The academic work really matters. And sometimes I think maybe I should just stay in my lane, right? And do that kind of work if that's what sort of coming naturally. But that's anyways, you asked sort of like, what are we grappling with in our own professional lives? That's definitely something that I think about a lot these days.
I think that's really important. And I will just add myself that I often don't know what my lane is anymore. Like, I just can't figure it out. My lane is all of them or none of them, right? Depending on who you're talking to. And so it goes to Janani was the one who mentioned the answering normative questions versus empirical ones and thinking about that. And I often struggle with that as well. Like, I want so desperately to do X, but if I do X, I won't get Y. And if I do Y, I won't get Z. And then I won't be able to study, you know, and you're like, oh, I just don't have that many. I have like kids and dogs and family and right. Like, I just can't do that. And I'm so committed and I just can't. I'm not sure how to answer those questions. Beth or Ebony, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where my social justice comes in, I think, is the methods and the dissemination. So I think, you know, there's a lot of criminologists or criminal justice researchers who have studied these issues and studied the reach of the criminal justice system and quite frankly have done a lot of harm in our criminal justice policies and our practices as well. And so my social justice really comes in I do struggle with the academic piece, and I didn't come from academia. I started in nonprofit, then came to academia, but I struggle with, you know, just the sake of doing research for research's sake, for the sake of writing journal articles or, you know, a book, and that's the end all be all. I recognize the importance of that, so I balance that, but you know, researchers also have done harm on communities. When we go into communities and we, you know, extract all this information from them, and then we, you know, get famous off of it. So I think that that's a problem. We have to turn around and disseminate the findings to impact somehow, whether that's policy, practice, changing the hearts and minds of the public. It's not enough just to, you know, again, extract in the stories and then, you know, move on. We owe it to them to do something with that. I do research in prisons, and a lot of times I can't pay them. And so, you know, at the very least, I can write the report and get it back to them. And then when I get a letter from an inmate saying like, this really captured my experiences, you know, that really means more to me than, you know, some of our high impact journals. But I recognize the game and that I have to do tenure track, you know, and I have to meet those requirements. But you know, this is personal to me. And so I do get emotional when academics are just kind of like, you know, doing their thing, because yeah, like Ruben said, like I have gone to prison to visit a loved one, and so I've dropped people off to donate plasma so they can pay fines and fees. So like this is person is political or whatever, so we have to that's where I guess my social justice comes in, and I just would encourage academics to be a change wherever you can be a change. I'm not saying everybody has to, do policy work or whatever. I think Hearts and Minds is worthy, and if that's where you're at, do it. But it's not enough just to publish in the journals and then move on.
Agree. Great point. Thank you.
I'm gonna jump in there too. I mean, I agree with everyone said. I mean, I have the privilege that I am a full professor, so I've kind of jumped over all the academic hurdles. So been able to work, locally doing some of this reform work. And I think the challenge that I've made for myself, and this is a very good challenge, I think, in the last, decade, is to make sure that the community is involved in this reform work too. And I think that's something that we often, like Ebony was talking about, we just do our research and we come back. And so having system involved people like, Ruben worked with his book, and other people have done as well, I think has been such a growth opportunity, and one of the best things and most fun things I've done over the last couple of years. And that's including just, having community members be part of your reform, having them disseminate things in ways that you wouldn't be able to, writing things in different newspapers, op-eds and things like that. And then over the last couple of years, even during the pandemic, I've been working in a prison, and we have incarcerated person research group. And so they help us with surveys, they help us design the reforms and things like that. And so I think that's what social justice has really been for me. It's local, but it's also local people who have been touched by the system. And so that's where I want to go. I was just going to say one thing, in terms of like balancing this academic policy divide, is that there's lots of people who want to do this work, both in policy and academia. And so I think that's why these sort of forums are great. So like I can do this policy work, but then maybe Danielle wants to write a paper with me, right? And so like these teams then I have found a lot of success with these teams getting this work out to different audiences. And so I think the solitary scholar, that was the model for much of our lives, is kind of changing. And so I think that's where I see some really cool social justice work being done as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Ebony and Beth, thank you. You moved me right into the next question, which is a question about academia. So the next two questions are really just what is missing. What are we not doing in academia? And I think both Beth and Ebony have begun to speak to that. And then my follow-up question will be about the practitioner world, right? What are they not doing, or how can we help them, or what's needed in that space? So we can intertwine those two questions if you want to, because sometimes I have a hard time separating them myself. But I'll start with the academic question and ask you what is missing or what needs to be done in academia that would allow us to engage with or embrace or focus on social justice in new or interesting or better ways.
I'll jump in. So I think the folks on this call are all brave and really impactful scholars who are doing the important work of listening and being vulnerable and including folks. I'm thinking about, Beth, your last set of comments, like who's at, the question of who's at the table, who's doing the work, and the things that we learn when we include the voices of people that we've excluded forever. And that includes, I think so on the one hand, of course, the obvious point, the inclusion of people with criminal records themselves in all manner of things, from, so you can do that through a kind of participatory action research vibe, if that's your thing. You can do that in other ways too, but hearing from folks with records at every stage of the process, even if it's just to check whether or not you got it right, even if it's to hear what Ebony said, you've captured my life, you've captured my experiences in ways that I find meaningful. Like that, I think doing that really matters. And I think the folks on this call and the folks, of course, the folks involved in many ways with this program, you know, do that kind of work all the time. The second thing is like, so on the one, the second thing is related to the first, which for me is a kind of vulnerability. So there's the exclusion of people with records, but there's also an exclusion of certain kinds of knowledge that I found, you know, striking, strange, you know, weird. I mean, so like embodied knowledge about a situation, your own values, morals, and politics, you know, within reason, like acknowledging that. You know, in something beyond, you know, academics like reflexivity statements. So they'll be like, oh, you know, I'm a political activist, or they'll be like, oh, you know, I'm a GLBTQ person from X community, and therefore, I don't think the and therefore is where the action is. I think the and therefore is essentializing a set of social positions as if they mean something. You know, I think it's more important to acknowledge what you think the ethical project is. And I think it's okay to move toward something like an ethical project. It's okay to move towards something like justice, and to have that front and forward if that's your thing. I think including a vision of justice in the kind of work that we do matters, and including you know, the parts of ourselves that we marginalize, our own emotions, our own feelings, our own thoughts into the process. I think you learn things that you didn't know before, and I think when you share them, they're impactful in different ways.
That's great, Ruben.
I'll just add something. I think that it'd be nice if it was honored in our, or if it was incorporated into our tenure process. Like I think like we will get, you know, people will get so much accolades for the number of publications and good journals and stuff. But if I say, you know, I spoke at the legislature and they took what I said and they changed, you know, people, I might get a few like, oh, okay, that's great, you know. But like what is rewarded is, you know. So I think if we can change the lens a little bit, because there isn't really an incentive right now, as Michelle said, to do that kind of work because it is time consuming and the change is small, you know, like we reduced the number of drug tests, you know, they're going to do once a month now. Like, you know, it's great for us who are in this field, that's great. But for other people, they're going to be like, yeah, okay. So I think if we can somehow put that into like the incentive process for tenure would go a long way too.
I think what I'd add to that, since I also am pre-tenure, is just this idea that we have to produce research quickly. I think it's really difficult to do that in an ethical way when you're working with the kinds of populations that many of us on this call are working with. I think for people like me and probably everyone on this call, relationship building is a huge component of it. Whether or not you're able to produce the kind of research that changes policy, you know, every step along the way, when you're interviewing, when you're going into prisons, when you're asking them to share stories with you, that's relationship building. And I think not treating people that you work with as instrumental, it takes time. And when we're in this mode of like, not only do you have to produce in the best journals, even though for many of us that might not mean anything at all, but you have to do so really, really quickly. I think it incentivizes treating humans as instrumental. And that's something that I've tried to counter, but I think if there were more recognition for the amount of time and emotional investment and psychological and social investment that takes, I feel like we move the needle a little bit more toward the point where we're trying to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I'll jump in on some of the comments here. I spent 2.5 years in academia and went running back to RTI, partly and I was tenured, so it wasn't because of that. Partly because of exactly what you were saying, that this work takes time and it takes resources and an investment that doesn't necessarily yield the best results to an academic calendar. And so I agree wholeheartedly with Janani in what you said. And you know, the other thing that I wanted to raise that relates to the comments that have just been made is the relationship of policy to both academic research and to practitioner needs and responsibilities. And you know, one of my frustrations over the course of my career has been the divorce of policy. Oftentimes, I mean, I've made the comment that one of the reasons that justice research is so underfunded is, you know, every lawmaker knows the answer, right? And so, and they know what the policy, which I said to someone earlier today, actually, was it just be meaner and we'll get rid of crime, right? Just be meaner. And that has to be the answer, right? And
well, it's worked so far.
These are the cocktail party conversations you have when somebody backs up against the wall and says, well, I know what to do. And it's like, no, these are complex problems that involve, human beings and all of the factors and contexts within which these things happen. And, I began my career as, solely doing quantitative work, really, and have been lucky enough over the course of my career to be exposed to some really good qualitative work and appreciate the value of it and the need for it. And it, in some ways, I feel like as much as I've learned over the last 40 years, I know a lot less now than I did 40 years ago. And I certainly have a lot more questions and a lot more understanding of why we don't know the answers, right? And so policy and the lack of patience with respect to being able to understand what is going to be necessary to move the needle on individuals who basically have been failed by every system, right? Is something that I think is going to require a lot of patience on the part of researchers, the individuals who engage with policy, and also the willingness to be repetitive in terms of saying the same thing over and over again, because people are set in their ideas and aren't necessarily ready to hear. I watched the National Academy webinar yesterday and heard them talking about binary recidivism measures. And it was like, well, Christy and I published our survival model work in 1990, right? I mean, but it's like, you have to hear stuff over and over and over again. But I think if there's anything that, one of the many things I've probably done wrong in my career is not really recognizing it sooner. So I really laud all the work that everyone on this panel is doing, because it's really important, but it's going to take patience.
If I could just chime in here on kind of a different thread, I feel like a lot of our conversation has been oriented around sort of like the role of academics in policy and policy change, which makes sense given where we're, sitting digitally. But I've also thought lately about sort of like, what are our obligations to, and we've talked a bit too about obligations to community members and impacted members. But I've thought a lot lately about sort of what are our obligations to activists too, and particularly sort of activists who aren't trying to necessarily enact kind of immediate policy changes or aren't reformers and are on the more sort of leftist end of kind of processes of social change, and what is the role of academics, or what could be the role there. And one of the simplest things I found is just sort of like the importance of academics saying yes. Like we plan out our calendars so far, and like I can tell you what days I'm teaching and what I'll be teaching 12 months from now, right? We think in these like insane time scales, right? And then organizing groups will come to me and be like, can you help put together a report on X, Y, and Z? I'm like, well, when is it due? And they're like, in 3 weeks, or like I get these emails from like media that are like, basically like, give me your blank lecture in a can on a 30-minute phone call, so this article isn't quite so trash, right? And so like we have like somewhat of a sociological lens here. And so it takes, I think, a lot of deliberation to be like, I'm not going to do what I thought I was going to do today, right? I'm going to spend an hour on the phone with this community group that wants to pick my brain, or I'm going to spend an hour on the phone with this reporter. And, I think institutions can make that easier, again, as we've been talking about, by incentivizing it. But I think it's also sort of wrapping our brain around the idea that as academics, we're supposed to be of service, right? And in community, and not necessarily just sort of pursuing our own intellectual ends. And I think about that too in terms of my teaching, right? Like, how can I be of service in the classroom? I sometimes think that, that our place in the classroom, given the number of students some of us teach at big schools, right, we have more of a direct impact every day we step foot in the classroom sometimes than I think we do on our research, which is funny because when we have these conversations around sort of activism and engagement and social change is often about our research, which, obviously filters into what we're teaching in the classroom and produces the text that we're using often in the classroom. But I think it's that relationship building with students as well. Students who want to go and work in the system, right? Students who want to be in nonprofits and be change makers, but also just students who are going to be voters, right, in a society. And I think that's where we can have a lot of impact as well.
I love that. Is it okay to jump in?
Please. Yes.
No, I love that point. And the question of like how do we make ourselves of service is such an important point in making oneself available, making oneself one available for free, right? Like kind of also for free, right? Is really important. I think about so I just want to say like that is important and interesting. When I think about the world of activists and practitioners and academics, I think the thing that for me that I try to remember, and I'm thinking about the question that you raised, like what's missing on the academic side, what's missing on the practitioner side. And this isn't quite a what's missing question, but it's just what I try to remember, which is like that they're all intellectuals, like they're all making sense of the world. They all bring a theory of some sort to the questions that they're raising, that's equally perhaps even as rigorous as some of the stuff that I'm certainly reading and some things that I'm thinking about. One of the problems with that, with folks having either embodied knowledge through practice. I've been doing this for 35 years and I know what I'm doing, the cocktail party politician who tells you be meaner because they understand, or the burnout social worker or case administrator who's been doing the thing forever, or the abolitionist who has a theory of social change and knows what the right thing to do is that everybody thinks they know, what the right thing to do is. And I think it's so easy to forget a point that got raised, by Pamela, which is that folks have been failed by every system. It's like one of the things that's easy to say, but hard to act upon and remember. And this point that Michelle raised earlier around time, and that all these things, like everything takes time, an inordinate amount of time to. And just to add a third thing to that, so one is the necessity for vulnerability. There's so many things we don't know and can't know. That's one of the gifts of, I think, the Academy is it proves to us that we don't know stuff. I think that's a gift. I think that we should accept that we don't have the answer. But that's also across categories: activists, practitioners of all kinds, politicians for sure have all the wrong answers all the time, which is why we vote them out. And that change can happen from all sorts of places. And I think there needs to be a deeper kind of humility that all of us bring to our work if we really want to see change happen. I think that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Ruben. Everyone's head is shaking. Yes, we agree with you.
Yeah, and I just want to add that I think, the thing that also academics, it's like we understand the complexity of the issue. Like, so, when we say like, how can we solve crime? Well, it depends, what's the, where it's easier just to say meaner, or like policymakers just want to, simple answers and things like that. So I think we also understand what we don't know, but we also understand the complexities. And I also think being a social justice researcher, I think that there's some identity and positionality in that too. Like we have to recognize that, because even when Michelle was talking about like working with activists, I think that is a risk for some people to work with like I think about, me as a Black woman, like what would that mean? Would I be taken less seriously in academic, if I'm, attach myself or provide my service to a group, does that diminish what I do? I think, and I'm not saying it does or doesn't, but it's something that it's a conversation that has to enter my mind. So I think it's also, I just recognize like in this social justice, like who we are and what we're bringing to that also matters.
Yep. So listen, my next question set was about practitioners, but we have 2 questions in the Q&A that relate to practitioners. So I want to give the audience a chance to chime in. So is it okay with you if I just read one and we see what we think about that? Okay, so the first one is actually, it's kind of a mix between academia and practitioner world. It says, Great panel, thanks. What would happen if an academic pushes for policy changes that are then counterproductive, or that could end up harming the communities that they wanted to serve instead of benefiting it? What are our responsibilities with failed reforms, or even with academic objectivity? How can we avoid those risks? I see that one's sort of sitting at the intersection of academia and the real world. Michelle. Oh, you gotta go.
Sorry,
You're leaving.
that was
Yep.
actually like
No,
a little
bye.
bit of a wave. I'm sorry. I gotta go pick up a kid.
No, it's fine.
Sick
Thank you.
kid. My phone
Thank you
is
for
blowing
joining
up.
us.
Yeah, I will just say, if I can take the privilege of a closing comment, and my apologies again.
Please.
I think Ruben's point about humility is so important, and that's why I use the phrase of being of service, because I think one of the things we need to think about as academics is, what do we actually know, right? And I think when working with people who want to enact change, they absolutely have a sort of theory of change in mind. And I think it takes a lot of humility and a lot of relationship building to figure out sort of where are the intersections where what I know can be helpful to you in a way that you're open to hearing on both parties, right?
Right.
And so it's not as though, right, activists are going to come to us or policymakers are going to come to us and we have all the answers. They're going to come to us with a specific set of questions, and we're going to have a specific set of reactions to those questions that may be things like, to get at the question that was asked, right? Like, I don't think that is an ethical idea, right? I think that could lead to harm. And maybe the things that I'm proposing could lead to harm that was unintended, right? We can think about like some of the complicated literature on the ban the box stuff, right? Our theory of how the world works doesn't always perfectly correspond with what happens when we try to make these changes in society. And so I think we all need to come at this with just a great deal of humility about what it is that we know and how we know it, and what it means to be of service in these spaces. So thanks
Great.
everybody for
Thank
the
you for
conversation.
joining us. Thank you.
Yeah,
Anyone else?
chime in. I mean, yeah, like what Michelle said, I mean, I do think that we will make mistakes, right? I think that's what you have to acknowledge. And I agree with Ruben that we need to have this humility and we need to have this vulnerability. Always speak out. I mean, I know I've had the luxury of staying in St. Louis, and I know that doesn't always work for academics for family and other reasons, but I think staying in one place, staying with the project. I was thinking about Pam, if you can stay around, then you can collect the data and see if it works and see what's going on, and continue talking with those communities, because we're not going to get it perfectly right the first time or the 10th time. It's always going to have to be kind of winnowed, and things are going to change. Like all of what we thought worked, the pandemic came, we're going to have to rethink many, many, many things now, right? And so I think there is something about longevity. I think that goes back to the tenure process. And I just really wanted to put a shout out to IU and Purdue have specific like practitioner or like policy tracks for tenure. There are some models out there that we could look at. But I think that's kind of one of the things, is sticking around and working with these groups for a long term can be really rewarding as well.
I'll just jump quickly and say that, I 100% agree on the humility comment. I mean, I think, in that part of what I was saying, it's like, wait a minute, I know I don't know 9 million things, times 10, times 1,000. And the longer I've done this, the more of that there is. But, I mean, the policymakers want answers. And so there's also this need for patience, right? That it takes a time to develop answers and to try to find the things that do work. But I also think that there needs to be a way to communicate to policymakers when their favorite idea does turn out to be harmful. This goes back to the question, right?
Mhm.
That, how long did it take for them to abandon Scared Straight when it was iogenic, right? I mean, but somebody thought it was great. And boot camps, right? I mean, Doris's work on boot camp said, wait a minute, this isn't working. And it still took, at least those are gone, and mostly. Mostly. And so, this, no one, certainly I would never want to do anything that's harmful, but also finding a way to demonstrate that something is harmful, and then to translate that into policy, you sort of come back to that again, this disconnect.
I think I want to just add one thing, just speaking a little more broadly to the humility point. I think many of us in this room, in the audience, we have that interpersonal trait, I think, as like we would approach our research with humility, I'd like to think. But I feel like as a culture, academics aren't the best at that, right? And so I feel like there's this, we
I can't
should be
believe you
able
would
to
say that. That's ridiculous.
I'm
We
an
should be able to
economist, Janani. I was so glad when I started doing criminal justice research because I got away from the economist. So
and it's not, and I don't even think it's necessarily arrogant. Sometimes it's just like your job security is going to be threatened if you say that you messed up, if you say that you made a mistake. And we can't, how can we move things in the direction that we want if we can't even, you know, kind of as a culture say that it's okay to say that you made a misstep, that you accidentally harmed a community because you thought something and then it turned out that it was wrong. And so I think that part of what we need over here is just more generosity in how we evaluate each other's work. And I think that starts actually like very early in our careers, right? Just the willingness to admit that you don't know something. That's something that's almost shunned even in graduate classrooms, right? Where grad students, especially, you know, those students who have certain backgrounds, are not even willing to say, okay, I don't understand what we're talking about here. So if we can't cultivate that culture of humility from the get-go and then keep building on it, I don't know how we can bring ourselves to admit that we harmed somebody or that our research got it wrong and that we should actually maybe take it all back and start at the drawing board all over again. So I would love to see a few changes at the kind of the more structural level in that sense.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's also important that we include community along the way, or whoever our stakeholders are along the way. Because again, even though we are doing research with communities or, you know, on them or whatever, we have rich data and we have their, you know, hours of transcript, we're still not of that. Like, and so even if we were once of that, or even if we have family members or friends of that, we're not in that right now. We still have a certain privilege that we, you know, something might be blocking us from the ways in which we see things. So I think it's still important to go back and co-work with the community or whoever the stakeholders are to implement that so that we don't do that harm based on our blind spots.
That's a really great point. Let me just read the other question just in case it inspires us. I want to make sure that I get to this other practitioner-based question. It says, I'm the director of the only governmental reentry program in a South American country. And I'm also on my way to graduating with a PhD in criminology. It has been frustrating to have X or Y knowledge and then trying to bring it to life. So there are billions of obstacles in this country where there are too many people who are in reentry to be able to serve them. There's a small professional group that has burnout. There's strong stigma. This person is curious whether our group would give any suggestions about what to prioritize when having knowledge from a PhD program, but putting that knowledge to work in a country that can't do many of the things that we think might be helpful. I think that's a really great question. And I think we're stumped. Maybe not, Ruben.
Well, I think you definitely stumped. But just I'm grasping at straws, which I think you have to find your allies, like wherever they are and whatever force they have. And it just seems to me, I mean, without knowing the context, you gotta. I think prioritizing things. I think for your own sense of health and well-being and professional longevity in the like your own professional development and the ability to stay in the field. I think you gotta also celebrate small wins. You know, who's doing what around you? Like that's super important. You know, where the community actors or leaders or just folks, everyday regular folks who are impacted by the things you're interested in, and what are the things that they're articulating that they need and they need most. I think that's crucial knowledge to begin any, real change if you want to have any ecological validity, right? And then lastly, don't overlook the good that you've done and the good that you're doing is really important. I mean, the criminal justice, this point that I cannot get over the point that Pamela raised. You know, folks have failed by every system like that. Like that is a statement of fact. It's not a theory. It's not right. Everybody on the call has discovered that the folks we care about have been failed by every single system, which means it's a giant problem, but it's also a million tiny problems. You know, so it's giant, massive in its entire scope, but it's also, so it's like from wherever you have influence, that's the place to intervene. And in a community of folks who are interested in intervening, I mean, this is where I think and folks impacted, I think this is where you'll find the most leverage. That's what I think.
Yeah, half a minute. To build on exactly what Ruben said, I mean, I agree with that so much, but I think it's important for you to realize that maybe keeping it simpler is better. And that do no harm means not to do things that actually what we know about super surveillance and all these other things and all these requirements. And so keeping stuff simple may be the best way. And then, you know, something that Sean Bushway has said when he talks about assistance is at minimum, the system shouldn't be doing things that makes it harder for people to succeed. So basically thinking about it from a success perspective for individuals rather than from the other way of trying to keep people from doing stuff.
Really, any other thoughts about practitioners or academia or anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to contribute? This is like my dream panel. I don't want to let you go. I could just talk to you all forever.
I have some thoughts about the practitioner side of things. I think it's easy to forget that like, and the researcher side, and you know, not so much the activist side. I feel like the activists are kind of tuned into this, but like the fact that we're talking about human beings, it seems so simple, and but that really is the point. It's like human beings who live out a bunch of decisions that somebody else made for them. That for me is the most important thing. So the person that's sitting across from you in that chair, if you're a case manager, or if you're you know, I don't know, like if you run assessments, or if you're a probation officer or something like that, like that's a human being. It's not a statistic. That's not a you know, whatever the identity category that we've been taught to fear and disdain. That's a person who's in a circumstance. A lot of that they brought on themselves. A lot of that's also something that has to be acknowledged. A lot of that they brought on themselves. A lot of that compounds the situation at the end. Folks do make terrible decisions. Of course they do. They're human beings. And a lot of that, they didn't. You know, folks who are wrestling with circumstances so far beyond their control. And so it's just important to remember the humanity of the person. And I think that lens helps you do no harm and helps you make choices that you'll be able to sleep with at night.
Yeah, well, and remembering that we've all made really horrible decisions. And to Ebony's point earlier about privilege, right? Some of the privilege that we get when we make those decisions doesn't end us up in a circumstance where we're no longer allowed the opportunity to make decisions. I think about that pretty often.
It's also just, I think this is where I love the life course perspective, right? When I was doing my dissertation research, even it was like different people ended up in different life circumstances because their trajectories diverged at this specific moment. But had that not happened, you know, how similar would their lives have been, right? And so to speak to everyone's point over here, that these are human beings and choices are shaped by things that happened earlier in life, and then the reverberating consequences are felt for decades thereafter. So whoever you're sitting opposite at this point, recognize that there's that pattern of privilege and disadvantage that has been preceding them for so long, and that you can really begin to understand it until you give them that time and that opportunity.
And for probably generations, not even just with them, right? It's, yeah. All right, well, I have 2:53. I am going to thank you with all of my heart. This was my favorite hour I've spent probably this entire COVID period, which has been traumatic for all of us. I'm very, very grateful for your time and your brilliance, and just for your openness in talking with the audience today. There's been just comments pouring in about how awesome this is, and you can see the little hands floating up, loving you as much as I do. So thank you very, very much. And anyone in the audience who would like to reach out to these panelists, I know them all, and I know they would be happy to take your questions. If you didn't get time to ask them today, or you couldn't think about formulating them fast enough and you want to just reach out to them, please do so. We're going to take just a couple of minute break. I think you get 5. Oh, I gave you 6. Look at me, I'm on it. So you got a 6-minute break, and then we're going to come back with our lived experience panel, which is some folks who have been involved in the justice system in various ways. And so they're going to talk about that experience, and that is facilitated by our graduate student at Mason, Ben Mackey. So I'll see you back here at 3 o'clock. Thank you, panelists.